The sink water had just turned warm when I saw it. The picture, Danny, my sweet grandson, laughing so wide you could almost hear it through the screen. Balloons, cake, candles, all glowing in that golden light that families have when they remember to invite you. Except, I wasn't there. The last message I'd gotten from him said, "Sure, Grandma, I'll call you soon." That was 3 weeks ago. I'd kept my phone near me every night since, charging it beside the bed like it was a heartbeat I couldn't afford to lose. And then, this photo, a party I didn't even know about. His mother, my daughter, right there beside him. Everyone's smiling. And me, I was washing dishes. The light from my phone flickered across the window, catching the steam, and for a moment I just stood there, frozen. Have you ever realized the people you love most stopped seeing you as part of their world? I wanted to look away, but then I saw it right behind him, someone holding my old quilt. You know, sometimes the hardest part of getting old isn't the aches in your knees, it's realizing your memories don't fit in their new lives. Hi there, I'm Evelyn Hart. And today, I want to tell you about the day that photo changed everything for me. This isn't just a story about being forgotten. It's about finding your way back into the picture even when nobody asks you to pose. If you've ever felt invisible, or if your phone's gone quiet lately, I hope this story reminds you that silence doesn't mean your story's over. So grab your tea, sit with me a while, and if this touches your heart, please tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear a grandmother's voice tonight. Because what happened next, while it still makes my hand shake to remember it, the house never felt big until it got quiet. Morning light came soft through lace curtains. The kettle sang on the stove. I fill the same blue mug every day. Steam lifts, the radio mumbles old songs in the corner. I wash my hands. I stand at the sink. My phone buzzes on the counter. I keep it there like a promised dot. Every Sunday I call Danny. It's been our ritual since he was small enough to hide behind his cereal box and giggle. He'd answer with a small, sleepy voice and say, "Hi, Grandma." I hung the line on that voice like a coat. Even now, when the city seems far and the lawn needs mowing, that voice makes the distance feel thin. I check the window where his graduation photo sits. His cap is crooked in the picture and his smile is all confidence. I water the poinsettias on the sill and say a little prayer for him. The house hums. The old refrigerator clicks like an old clock. I sweep the porch. I whistle to the robins. I pin a sprig of rosemary in my apron. The day feels ordinary. I like ordinary. It keeps me safe. But there is a small, sharp sound I cannot tune out. His name waiting on the other end of the line. When the phone rings and it's not him, my chest tightens. I tell myself he is busy. He has school, work, friends, life. I make his favorite sugar cookies and put them in the oven. The timer dings and I set them on the cooling rack. I pick up the phone and dial. The first time he didn't answer, I left a short message, just checking in. "Love you." The second time, I called 3 times and then sat by the window, listening to the street. The third time, I listened to his voicemail turn into an old recording of a song I'd sung to him. My hands ache. My tea went cold. On Sunday, I light a candle when I call him. It's silly. It feels like company. I tell him about the weather, about Mr. Thompson's new mailbox, about the persimmon tree giving up its fruit late this year. I read him recipes over the phone. He would laugh and say, "You're the only one who makes pie like that, Grandma." The house seems to swallow sound these days. I put my palm on the wood table where his letters used to be. I keep the envelope he drew on when he was 5. I keep his tiny graduation tassel in a mason jar. Memory holds us in place. Outside, the mailbox creaks. I stand up slowly and shuffle to the door. A neighbor waves. I smile. He smiles back and keeps walking. The porch light hums softly when the dawn is thin. I take a breath. I sat down at the kitchen table, hands folded over my knees. The wooden chair creaks in a familiar way, like an old friend clearing its throat. I opened the drawer and fingered the stack of envelopes with his handwriting. Some are smudged from years of being unfolded and folded again. There is a child's crabbed G on one. I read them in order and feel time like a ribbon winding back. Each note smelled faintly of crayons or campfire, smoke, or the cologne of a boy finding his own way. Sometimes, I put on Henry's old flannel and imagine him whistling from the workshop. He used to take the time to sit with us, even when the factory shift left him bound. He'd listen to a long story like it was the most important news. Now, the chair across from me is empty. I set my cup down and tend to small things to keep my hands busy, mending a sock, tightening a loose button, turning a photo to the light so it shines brighter on the mantel. I begin my ritual at 9. I brew the coffee. I butter a slice of bread. I call it the Sunday call, even if it's Wednesday. There is comfort in the name. I clear my throat like I'm about to speak at church. I know every pause in his voice. I know when to laugh. I know when to be quiet. These are the things that make me his grandmother. When the house was full, the telephone was a bell that kept the rhythm of our days. We'd argue about small things and then put gravy on them and eat together. After Henry passed, those calls kept me anchored. The phone belonged to both of us. I would dial and wait for that warm, clumsy voice. When I didn't hear it, the house seemed to tilt. A chair squeaked upstairs, and I thought perhaps my daughter was home early, but the day was bright and the streets smelled like cut grass and engine oil. I pulled a towel over my hands and opened the back door to check the garden. The mint had grown wild. The tomatoes were blushing red. I touched a leaf, its texture rough and alive, and for a moment I was a young woman again, knees muddy, laughing without knowing what I was laughing for. A breeze pushed the curtain in the kitchen, and it brushed my cheek like a small hello. I picked up the phone, thumbed through old messages that faded into promises. There must be a reason. Maybe his phone died. Maybe his class ran late. Maybe the world swallowed his attention like it has swallowed so many other things. I hummed under my breath, a song Henry taught me, the tune rusty now but faithful. It steadied me. I thought about calling my sister, about asking for advice. But she was across state lines and had her own library of small troubles. Instead, I made a list of small, important things to do. Call the doctor to refill my pills, pull the laundry from the line, bake biscuits for the church luncheon. The list kept my day tidy. I padded down the hallway and stood for a moment in the doorway of Danny's old room. It still smelled faintly of his aftershave. A memory trapped like a pressed flower. The shelves held trophies and a shoebox full of ticket stubs and a science fair ribbon. Everything seemed paused, as if someone had hit stop but forgotten to press play again. I dialed and the line hummed. I left another message. Danny, it's Grandma. Just wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you can. I made your favorite cookies. I pressed end and sat at the table, watching the second hand on the clock travel its small, inevitable path. My chest felt like a bowl settling after someone drops a spoon into it. I tell myself I will not worry. I rehearse calm like a prayer. But at night, the quiet whispers different things. It suggests that men grow and forget the women who held them. It whispers that the world moves forward while we stand still, clutching our quilts. I fold my hands and let the thoughts sink, then set it aside like another mending job. For a long time, ritual kept me whole. For a long time, the phone was a promise. But promises fray, and as I walked back into the kitchen, kettle hissing again, the laughter from next door threaded the air like a new voice in an old hymn. I was born in a house that smelled of bread and coal. The town was small and the rules were practical. We learned to repair things before we bought new ones. We learned to say thank you and to hold the door for the person behind us. My father taught me how to sew a straight seam, and my mother taught me how to hold a grudge until you could turn it into a lesson. Henry came along like someone who had been waiting on the edge of the road. He had a laugh that shook dust from curtains. He worked with his hands, and he spoke in the kind of sentences that did not need decoration. He loved me without great words. He proved it by showing up. He showed up at the bus station when I came home late. He showed up with 2 hands to fix the roof after the storm. He showed up to fix a broken throttle on a summer lawn mower, and then swept the porch clean with the same hand that showed his gentleness. We married in the church with the cracked bell. The pictures are small and sun-faded. Our wedding cake toppled a little because Henry's cousin set it in the back of a pickup and drove too fast down Main Street. We danced in borrowed shoes. People cried and clapped and sat up late, telling stories about how stubborn we both were. We worked, we saved, we learned to stretch $1 until it sang. Children arrived like seasons, one by one, bright and loud. We made a life with a washer that juddered and a porch where legs swung. After dinner, Henry taught our children that a job well done is its own kind of dignity. He taught them not to be ashamed to sweat or to say I'm sorry when you break something you love. Family, to me then, was unbreakable. It was a quilt you folded and passed down, each generation tucking something new into the seams. We made room for other people's troubles. We carried the weight of illness and layoffs and arguments, and still found a place to put the holiday pie. I believed that was what it meant to be American, to build something together. Even if the boards are rough, there were hard years. There was the year the factory slowed down, and we learned to speak in small sentences about money. There was the time Henry came home with his hand bandaged after the press ate a fingertip. We sat in the living room, and he thumbed the Bible with one hand and told jokes until we started to laugh again. Those were the rooms where love was the thing that stayed when everything else went away. I taught my children to respect others. I taught them to take responsibility. We encouraged them to chase what made them glow inside. I watched them go, one to college, one to a distant city, one to a job that had more hours than promise. I cried the first night the house was too quiet. I cried for the small noises that had held us together, the clink of cutlery, the creak of the screen door, the way the dog would choose one lap and live there. Henry and I built traditions. Sunday dinners were a law. We ate roast and beans and our daughter's pumpkin pie. We told stories about our parents and how they did things differently. We kept the grandchildren's art on the fridge with magnets that had been there for decades. I would pinch a cheek and call someone my little light as if that would keep the sun from setting on them. When Henry passed, I learned a new shape of grief. It arrived in slow, polite visits. The house felt like a hand missing a finger. There was a space at the table that would not be filled. I kept the porch light on for a long time. Friends came by with casseroles. The town came around us. In those days, the rhythms of life and death felt like a sturdy thing, part of the pattern. But time is a clever seamstress. It stitches new patterns in old quilts. Children grow and collect their own threads. They move to new towns. They meet people whose habits are different. The quilt stretches, and sometimes the seams thin. I trusted that the pull would not undo the weave. I believed in the work we had done together, years of being present, of teaching, of loving without perfection. Henry used to say, "Family's like a garden. You can't stop watering it just because it's raining." It sounded plain then. It sounded like a line from a church bulletin. I understood it deeply after we had our first grandchild. I watered the garden. I sent packages with homemade cookies. I kept the line of letters going. I felt secure in that work, believing the soil would remember us even if we left. I didn't realize how dry ours had gotten until it cracked. We built our life on busy hands and steady plates. For years, the house was a bustling place. Birthdays crowded the calendar, and we learned to say the same grace twice without boredom. I answered the phone with a practiced cheer, and I felt proud when one of the kids called to say, "Are you coming over, Mom?" I felt needed and useful. I was Grandma Eve, the woman who could fix a hymn and a broken heart. Sunday dinners became a ritual that smelled like roast and cinnamon. We passed plates around and argued about the best way to snap green beans. My grandchildren climbed on laps and left thumbprints on the window. I taught them how to braid hair and how to whistle through their teeth. These small instructions felt like a way of tying them back to us. But life gathers other things, jobs that ask for everything, phones that carry 1,000 voices, plans that are 5 years long, and promises that are made in the voice of someone who believes tomorrow will be free. Birthday invitations turned into texts. A quick plan evolved into a post. We tried to be modern without meaning to be rude. It crept up in small ways. A missed call, a late RSVP, a message read but not answered. I remember the night my daughter forgot to call on my birthday. I baked her favorite pie and waited by the phone. I reheated a slice and warmed the coffee even when the clock said it was late. I left a message and heard nothing. She called in the morning with a soft voice and said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I fell asleep." I understood that she had a life that pulled at her. I told myself, everyone gets busy. I told myself I had given her all I could. Still, the small omissions gathered like dust on a shelf. They are easy to miss. You sweep them away, and the floor looks clean until someone points out the chipped paint on the sill. The weight of small things is heavy. I would call and hear laughter in the background and feel distant. I would send recipes and get a thumbs up emoji. It felt efficient, like being acknowledged by a machine instead of a person. Sometimes my daughter would say, "We love you, Mom," and I could hear it was true. But sometimes I would only hear the line fall silent. The grandkids grew, and their world got wider. They had schedules that required apps and maps and other people's houses. I tried to be part of that world. I learned to text. I watched videos. I celebrated small victories through a screen, which never warms the hands in quite the same way. There was no single dramatic fracture, no shouting match or betrayal. It was quieter, a missing call here, a forgotten anniversary there. The cracking sound is a tiny thing until you put your ear to the wood and hear it run. You never notice the moment a family drifts. It is too quiet. One day you realize the person who used to be your weekend is now someone whose calendar is full of other people's needs. I remember the first time it felt odd. He answered the phone once with a distracted hello and said, "Grandma, sorry, I gotta go, class." I told him about a recipe and he said, "That's great, Grandma," and hung up. The kindness was there, but the patience was thin. I told myself it was school, then a job, then the kind of life that runs on deadlines. I started to notice patterns. The Sunday call shifted to a text. The text shifted to a like on a photo. The like felt small, but it was something. Then the likes stopped. He would watch my stories and not comment. He would see my messages on the group thread and not say a single word. I sat with the silence, like a cup cooling on the counter. I tried other things. I mailed letters. I dropped off a pie at his door once and left before he saw me. I thought perhaps I was being old-fashioned. I went to the park where he used to play as a child and sat on the bench and watched a man push a stroller. His face looked like a memory, but not mine. It hurt in a new place, not the chest but the shoulders, where you carry 1,000 small disappointments. People told me to let it go. People are busy, they said kindly. He's young, he'll come back. But hearing it made me feel like a problem to be boxed and put away. I had not wanted to be a problem. I had given time, recipes, quilts, and patience. I had shown up for every recital and every small scraped knee. I had thought that was enough to keep us in one another's stories. I still set his plate at the table when I cooked. Habit dies hard. I left the place for him like a promise written in crockery. The spoon would cool, untouched. The house kept its rhythms, and I kept mine. I could not name the small fear that grew in me, but it tugged at the hem of everything. The way I folded the towel, the way I watered the plants, the extra stitch on a sweater sleeve. And then came the day Danny stopped calling back. The box felt lighter than the work I put into it. I wrapped each cookie in waxed paper and slid the card inside like a small promise. My hand wrote his name in the careful round letters I'd practiced for years. Daniel Hart. I tucked in a silly line about candles and handed the parcel to the postman. I felt that quiet pride only small acts give. 3 days passed. I left a message bright, steady. "Happy birthday, love. Call me when you can." The voicemail sounded like a bird tapping against glass. The mailbox offered nothing but bills. Then, the package returned with a sticker. Wrong address. I stood in the kitchen with that strip of paper in my hand and the room narrowed to its letters. Later, I did something I tell myself I shouldn't. I went online. Social media is a neighbor you can't unsee. There he was, Danny with a cake, frosting on his lip, the banner reading 21. His arm around my daughter, balloons and laughter like light. I counted faces like prayers. My heart dropped. I wasn't missing, I was uninvited. Behind him, draped over a chair, was a quilt I knew by wrong threads and a little crescent where I'd mended it after too many washings. Faded blue stars. A strip of green eye, stitched when his sister was born. I pressed my thumb to the screen as if touch could pull me into the room. I'd spent nights stitching that quilt while Henry snored in his chair. Quilts are quiet work. They gather scent and crumbs and the weight of small bodies. To see it there at a party I had not been asked to felt like a ledger left unpaid. I told myself stories to soften the cut. Maybe they'd borrowed it. Maybe someone had found it at the neighbor's and carted it along. The explanations were thin fabric over a raw place. I called Danny's number. It went to voicemail. I left another message, calmer this time. "Danny, it's Grandma. Happy birthday. Please call me." The sun moved across the kitchen wall. Outside a child rode past and shouted, and somewhere a dog barked like a clock. The day kept its ordinary tasks and I folded the returned box and tucked the card into the drawer with old letters and ticket stubs. I set the tray aside and wiped the counter until my hands left the scent of lemon. That evening I thought about how invitations and absences keep similar shapes. I remembered Henry's way of fixing things and how he used to say that timing is often kinder than explanation. I brewed tea and sat with the mug like it was a small confidant. I dressed in the cardigan Henry liked and smoothed my hair. I wrapped a cookie in a napkin and put it in a paper bag. I did not yet have a plan, only the shape of a small, determined thing. The house felt heavy with possibilities. I stepped outside with the bag and walked toward their street, feeling the sun as if it were permission. My heart was a loose itch. I did not know if I was going to knock or to leave the package on the porch, but I knew I could not let that sticker be the last word on me. Softly, I felt my breath catch like a small bird, and that quilt, the one behind him, That was the one I made when his mother was born. I left the porch with the weight of an apology I had not made. The cookie bag was warm in my hands and the quiet in my chest felt like a room waiting for a second chair. I had meant to be gentle when I knocked. The door opened and the world inside moved like a play where someone had forgotten to hand me a program. A neighbor with a casserole smiled and a child's head bobbed, then ducked. My daughter came to the door with a practiced softness. "We didn't want you driving at night, Mom," she said. "It would have been easier this way." Easier for whom? I left the card on the step and went home with my dignity folded small in my lap. I called again. The line went to voicemail. I texted and waited for the little ticks that turned blue. They came and sat there like small, indifferent echoes. The family group chat, our usual hub of recipe swaps and birthday photos, was quiet. A time stamp glared at me. The silence felt deliberate. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. People are busy. They make plans and forget the tiny parts that matter to other people. But explanations are thin when you stand with a returned parcel and an empty seat at the table. Shame is patient. It grows like ivy, winding until you can't tell where you end and the feeling begins. A couple of days later, I went to the grocery store because it seemed important to move through ordinary tasks. I bought milk and bread and a bunch of parsley. In the cereal aisle, I overheard two women talk in low voices. "Did you hear about the hearts?" One asked. "Private family thing," the other answered. Those words landed in my chest. Private family thing, a polite lock on a room I used to belong to. I stood with a cart and felt unmoored. Loneliness isn't just being alone, it's knowing they had room, just not for you. I listened to them, exchanged theories like small sermons, and felt my face grow warm with an old ache. I had hoped the years would dull at home. I tried to stitch sense back into the day. I thumbed through photographs, pausing at a picture of Henry with his arm slung casually over my shoulder. He looked steady there, as if he could keep the world from changing its mind. I made a list. Call my sister. Call the pastor. Mend the hem on the blue dress. At the bottom I added a single practical thing dropped by their house. If not to enter, then at least to leave food on the porch and say, "I tried." The next morning I filled a thermos and baked a small loaf of bread. I wrapped it in cloth the way my mother taught me. I sat in the car for a long moment, hands on the wheel, copying a courage I wasn't sure I had. The sun felt like a small permission. I drove across town with simple determination. The road was familiar, and I counted street signs as if they were stepping stones. I parked down the street and watched the house for a long beat. Laughter floated faintly through a curtain like someone else's hymn. I rehearsed soft words in the car. Maybe it's a mistake. Each rehearsal steadied my hands. When I took the loaf from the bag, the cloth smelled like butter and oven heat. My fingers smoothed it the way they'd smoothed a child's forehead. Then I stepped onto the sidewalk with my small offering and walked up to the porch. My knees were steady. My heart trembled, but I walked on. I parked 2 houses down and watched the house where I'd once been nearly every Sunday. Laughter floated from an upstairs window. The scent of frying onions drifted across the yard like a memory. I had bread and jam in a paper bag. Simple things. I told myself they were for the party, though part of me wanted to see him face to face and ask gently why my name wasn't on the list. I walked up the sidewalk slowly. My hands rehearsed soft words. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe you didn't know. The front porch looked the same, with a welcome mat that read home, and a scuff where a child's bicycle had once scraped it. I knocked once, then twice, and the sound echoed more than I expected. For a long moment, no one answered. I could see movement through the curtained window arms, passing plates, someone reaching for a phone. Then the back door opened and my daughter stepped out, cheeks flushed from some hurried task. She smiled with a careful brightness. "Grandma E," she called as if she had practiced the note. A car slipped into the driveway behind me. Mr. Keller from 2 doors down, carrying a paper bag. He waved and said, "Good to see you, Evelyn," like a man adding a salt shaker to a table. He seemed surprised I had come, but pleased. He stood nearby, as if to anchor me to the moment. I stepped up onto the porch and peered in. The room held familiar faces, and some new ones. Danny was there, taller than the photo had shown. The kind of taller that makes you realize childhood recedes farther than you think. He smiled when he saw me, but the smile was cautious, as if calibrated for an audience. A child zipped past my knees and snagged at a balloon. Someone offered me a paper plate with cake. Habit made me reach for it, for a kitchen routine that had shaped so many of our gatherings. Then I felt the oddness of not being expected, feeling like a chair folded in another room. My daughter stepped closer and put her hand on my shoulder. Her perfume was faint, her voice soft. "We didn't want you driving at night, Mom," she said. The sentence landed like a polite shield. I wanted to ask why the decision had been made without me. I wanted to tell her that I would have come, that I had been outside the window in the sun, holding a loaf of bread. I set the bag down on the counter with fingers that trembled but did not drop. The jam jar made a small sound against the marble, and someone called for more plates. I could feel the room pull back into itself, folding around the plan I had not been part of. For a second, I thought I might be mistaken. Perhaps someone else had been called Grandma. But then Danny stepped forward. His face was a map of hesitation. He said my name like a question, and then, like a bridge, he reached out and took my hands, warm and real, and I could feel the pulse of him, the one who used to hide under card tables. The room stilled a little. My daughter's eyes glistened, and she looked away, as if looking would admit a trespass. Mr. Keller grinned with a knowing air. Someone handed me a paper napkin, and the texture of it steadied me. The world rearranged itself minutely around that touch, softly. Then the front door opened. My hands left a faint flower print on the counter, where I set the bread. The house hummed with plates and small talk, but beneath that hum was a tightness like a pulled string. My daughter's voice kept its practiced smoothness. "We didn't want you driving at night, Mom," she said. The sentence landed like a justification. I smiled because that is what I was taught. Smiles hold things steady. Danny hovered nearby, avoiding eye contact as if eyes could tell more than mouths could. He looked at me and then away. The silence between us had its own language. "I made some cookies," I said softly. "I left them on the porch because I thought you might like them." My daughter replied, "That's sweet, Mom, thanks." Her hands moved fast, arranging plates as if to keep the rhythm of the party intact. I wanted to ask why decisions about me were being made without my input. I wanted to say I had stood outside earlier and watched them through the window, but I folded my hands and let small talk smooth the edge of truth. I tucked the card into a recipe book and set the bread on the counter. Danny brushed past me. That small contact made me feel both seen and strange. I left with a wave and drove home with the window cracked. The night air rubbed against my cardigan like a reminder. The answering machine blinked when I walked in. The first message was a robocall. The next was a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Martha, my neighbor who canned peaches and told the funniest stories. Evelyn, are you entering the quilt show? There's not much time. Will you?" Her voice had urgency and a softness that felt like reaching out. I hadn't talked to Martha much since Henry died. Her call felt like a hand on my shoulder. Henry had always wished my quilts would be seen. I thought of the returned package, the photo, the quilt behind Danny. An idea tugged at me. Maybe this was a way to be present on my own terms. It was one kind of hurt to be left off a guest list. It was another to be left out of a life. Entering the show meant being seen without asking permission. But the deadline was only days away. I lay awake that night longer than usual. The house made small, honest noises. The refrigerator sighed. The pipes whispered, each one a companion to the worry lodged in my ribs. I thought of Henry and the easy certainty he carried. In the dim, I replayed the party picture. Danny with cake, the quilt behind him. Why was I not in that picture? That small question grew roots. The next morning, I brewed tea and wrote a note to myself, short and plain. "You will not wait for permission to be seen." I tried to tie the thought to action. I called my sister and said I might go to the quilt show. She was quiet then practical, but she said, "If it matters to you, do it." All day, I moved through ordinary tasks like a woman on a pilgrimage. I mended not from necessity but to make my hands remember they were useful. I folded linens and put them away with care. Each small job kept the ache from turning into a roar. Still, toward evening, the answering machine blinked, and the little red light promised news from the world. I pressed play. A pharmacy reminder chirped. Then a brief message from a woman whose voice I hadn't heard in a long time began to speak. The sound arrived like a letter. Asterisk. The voice on the machine reached across years. "Evelyn, it's Martha. Are you entering the quilt show?" She sounded urgent. Martha had always been a fixture. Jars of peaches, loud laughter. Her call was a small bridge. I called back, "Evie, they're holding it at the town hall. Henry liked your patterns. Put something in. Deadline's Friday. I'll pick it up. Promise me you'll try." Her insistence felt like love. I thought of Henry's face at the fair, proud and steady. I looked at the quilt draped over the chair, the same one in the party photo. It had absorbed years of lap warmth and small tears. The idea of showing my work felt like stepping into a mirror I hadn't planned for. "But Martha, I began. What if they laugh? She scoffed gently. They won't. Your work is honest. Be proud. We'll get it sorted. The deadline was close. My hands felt rusty but ready. I opened the cedar chest where I kept scraps. The smell of lavender rose up. Squares and ribbons tumbled out. A strip from Henry's shirt. A collar from my daughter's first dress. Bits of costume fabric from Halloween. Quilt making had always been stitching memory into cloth. I found the sewing basket and a tin of needles. I unrolled thread and it gleamed. At the kitchen table one spread the pieces. Each patch was a life, small scraps holding stories. Making the quilt was not showmanship. It was a way to say, without words, who we were. An odd steadiness settled in me then. I knew this was about more than being seen. It was about reclaiming the work I had done, the warmth I had given, the small economy of love that goes unnoticed until you need it to be noticed. Suddenly the kitchen felt like a workshop again. I cleared a space by the window where the light was kind and put the sewing basket in the middle of the table. My hands remembered the rhythm even when my mind did not. I worked with the radio low, an old station that played songs Henry had hummed in the garage. The melody kept my movements steady. Neighbors came by, Martha first, with a thermos and a grin. Then Mrs. Alvarez with a box of pins she'd saved from her mother. They offered tools and gossip and their own small stories. Their arrival felt less like rescue and more like a vote. We see you. I began to sew in earnest. The pieces came together with small, honest stitches. I trimmed and pinned and ironed seams until the cloth lay flat and open. With each square I placed, I told a memory, out loud, a field trip, a scraped knee, Henry's slow dance in the kitchen. The room filled with the sound of work and quiet conversation. Time pressed like a thumb at the edge of a page. The deadline was a date on a calendar that suddenly mattered more than it had any right to. I sewed through the afternoon and into the night, hands steady, even when my eyes blurred. I drank coffee that tasted of too many late hours and smiled at the stubborn joy of making something true. By midnight the top was nearly done. I smoothed the final square into place, one representing the recipe box, one a hospital bracelet, one a sun-bleached ribbon from a fair. Each square was a small witness. The quilt center still needed the anchor, the heart that keeps a pattern from floating away. I reached into the basket, and the first patch my fingers touched was the faded blue of Danny's baby blanket. I laid the quilt out on the dining table and let it breathe. Light from the window fell across the squares like a slow hand, highlighting seams and stories. Each patch told a little life. Henry's collar from a shirt he wore to town meetings, a scrap from my daughter's first dress, a blue square that had once been Danny's blanket. I ran my fingers over the stitches and felt time move under my palm. The work changed me. Where silence had been a hollow, the quilt became a voice. For the first time in months, I felt more than the ache of being left out. I felt a plan, quiet as a prayer. Making the quilt stopped being about winning a ribbon. It became a way to hold our family in one place when the world felt like it was sorting us into different boxes. Neighbors stopped by with cups of coffee and offers. Martha brought pins and a grin. "You're making something true, Evie," she said, handing me a needle. I thanked her and kept sewing. The rhythm steadied me, the up, the pull, the small knot that secured a memory into cloth. Henry would have liked the way the squares fit together. I stitched late into the night. The house listened and kept its breath small and steady. I told the quilt things I hadn't said aloud, about the nights I stayed up waiting for a call, about the time I mended Danny's sleeve after he got his first job, about forgiving even when I hadn't been forgiven. Each confession was a tiny thread, and each thread held. When I sewed the square with Danny's tiny blanket into the center, I felt a little tremor run through me. It was not only about him, it was about the years that make children strangers to the hands that raise them. The center became a small pulpit. Around it I placed a pocket for a letter, a place to tuck words I might not say. I wrote a simple note and slid it into that pocket. I was here. I am proud of you. The quilt was not a protest so much as a record. It told of Sunday dinners and first dates and the hospital room where Henry took my hand and hummed until dawn. It carried stains of jam and the faint ghost smell of cologne from boys who outgrew our laps. It hung memory like a shawl, and in doing so asked people to remember. At the midpoint of my work, I realized something that steadied my hands. I could not wait for invitations to make me seen. I could make myself visible on my own terms. That felt like courage. It felt like rebellion in a very small room. The town hall smelled of varnish and lemon oil when I carried the quilt in for judging. I walked with it like it was a child needing reassurance. People's eyes lifted as I passed. Some recognized my name, some recognized Henry's. A few nodded, the way small towns do when they find the edges of a story they already half know. That night, after I had pinned the final edge and smoothed the backing, I sat on the porch and watched the street. I remembered how Henry used to take my hand and say, "You do the kind of work that lasts, Evie." That felt true now more than ever. The quilt wasn't fabric, it was forgiveness. But the night before the show, something or someone went missing. I woke before dawn to the hush of the house and a hollow where comfort usually lived. The little pocket I had stitched into the center, the one holding my note, was not where I left it. A square with a faded star had vanished. My breath hitched. For a moment I thought I had misplaced it in the flurry, but the empty space felt deliberate. I stood on the porch and listened to the street, feeling the missing piece like a silence shaped in my chest. Wondered who would take a thing stitched with history. She called before I had finished my tea. Her voice was sharp, brittle as a dried leaf. "Evelyn, I heard you're putting that quilt in the show," she said without greeting. I felt the cup tremble in my hand. "They were talking about it at the salon," she went on. "People will see things. You shouldn't air our family laundry." I listened like someone learning a language new to them. I had not expected scandal. I had expected quiet smiles and the polite nod of folks who like good stitches. My daughter's words landed where a bruise might form, swift and honest. "It's not laundry," I replied. "It's a record. It's our story." She raised her voice. "Some things are private, Mom. Some things aren't for the whole town to read. Do you really need to do this?" There it was, the old plea to preserve peace at the cost of truth. I remembered the many times our family had chosen politeness over repair, and how the silence had hollowed us instead of healed us. I thought about Henry and how he taught me to stand for what mattered, even when it was uncomfortable. There is a kind of courage that comes only after you have lost everything else you leaned on. I had reached that place where staying silent felt like betrayal to myself. The quilt had become more than cloth. It was a line I drew around my life with intention. "Listen, Evie," my daughter said, softer then, as if appealing to a child. "Please, think of how this looks. Think of the grandchildren." Her voice broke, and for a moment I heard the little girl she once was, and my heart softened. I told her I understood her worry, but that I had to do this for myself. I did not want to hurt her. I wanted to hold hands and promise easier things, but peace that requires silence is brittle. I thought of the people who had come to my kitchen in twilight and shared stories over tea, whose hands had steadied mine. I thought of Martha and Mrs. Alvarez, and the town hall waiting with its varnished floors. Finally, I said, "If the quilt shows who we are, good. If it makes people uncomfortable, maybe that means something needs saying. I won't hide because it makes others awkward." There was a long hush. My daughter sighed and said she would come to the show more to keep an eye than to make peace. I accepted that small concession like a gift. I folded the phone into the drawer and stood for a while in the light. Decision felt like stepping off a small ledge. I knew there would be whispers and looks. I knew neighbors would choose sides, perhaps, but the choice to display the quilt was mine. I would let the work speak. I would let the stitches tell the truth. On the morning of the show, as I pinned the final label to the corner, my hands shook. Then the driveway hummed with a familiar engine. Danny's car pulled up like a small miracle. He stepped out and carried a folded chair in one hand like he'd practiced it. He crossed the lawn with hesitant steps, eyes soft as if seeing our years for the first time, then nodded and stayed. He stood near the folding chairs, hands in his pockets, uncertain. For a moment, I thought he might leave. Instead, he stepped forward, eyes catching on the stitches like a map. His voice came soft. "Grandma," he said, "I didn't know." He explained slow and honest that life had pulled him another way. Classes ran late, a new job, 8 weekends, friends planned nights he did not want to miss. He hadn't meant to shut me out. He had drifted, and the drift had a way of making absence feel ordinary. People around us listened. The quilts hung with the hush of things that hold stories. A woman in the front traced a pattern with her finger, and someone said, "That's Evelyn Hart's work." The name moved through the room like a small wind. Danny's face reddened with shame, then cleared into something like resolve. "I saw the picture, and I thought the quilt was borrowed," he said. "It was clumsy, but it was true." He reached for my hand, and his warmth felt like a small bridge. I told him why certain squares mattered: the blue blanket, the recipe pocket, the seam from a shirt Henry wore to the factory. He blinked and listened as if the stitches were a language he was only now learning. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "I thought you knew," I answered. He promised small things instead of grand apologies. He promised to come more, to call, to bring pie, and to sit for an hour when he could. He offered steady, practical plans: help at the church, fix a leaky porch, take my trash to the curb sometimes. He meant them. Neighbors nodded. Martha beamed like someone who'd placed a quiet bet on hope. My daughter watched, the hard line of her jaw softening as the talk went on. The air felt like a slow thaw, nothing miraculous, just the small thaw of people remembering how to care again. A judge leaned in and said, "This quilt reads like an archive of a family's small mercies." The sentence made neighbors murmur. Danny told a memory about the time he lost a tooth at the park and came home with a napkin, and how he'd later found my comforting note tucked in his lunchbox. The simple scene made people laugh, and, after, fall quiet. He swore to visit, not with excuses, but with hands ready to do small things that matter most. Our neighbors watched. He stayed through judging, awkward and real, posing beside the quilt for a photo, and then helping hand out coffee. He folded chairs and carried a thermos. Those ordinary acts felt like vows. I watched him walk back under this soft evening, measured and sincere. He had not undone months in a day. He had taken a step. You can't rebuild time, but you can start where the needle last touched. Then, at the show, someone unexpected stood beside my quilt. I thought the hardest part had been the silence, but that evening brought a different weight, a confrontation I had long feared. My daughter arrived at the town hall with a tightness I recognized. "You shouldn't have done this, Mom," she said. "You made people uncomfortable." Her words made the hall narrower. I expected whispers, but not this directness. The crowd watched like neighbors at a porch fence. Being scolded for telling truth felt odd and painful. I wanted to answer with a list of things I'd done for her night's babysitting. Pie sent when she worked late, but her voice held exhaustion. A mother's worry folded into anger. She named small grievances, calls that went unanswered, a birthday that felt curt, plans that slipped by. Each thing landed with a small sting. I pictured her as a child, knees scraped, and my hands cleaning away the dirt. The impulse to retort was strong, but Henry's old advice came to me: speak when you can hold the other person afterward. I breathed and tried that patience. "I made the quilt because it remembers us," I said. "If it makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but silence has hollowed too much of our story." My voice shook. The room hummed. Some faces softened, others furrowed. The complexity of love in families isn't tidy. It is a tangle. For a while the conversation felt like two rivers meeting. Words rose. A woman near the back whispered something about family privacy. A man muttered about propriety. I thought about all the small kindnesses that had carried us: Mrs. Alvarez bringing soup, Mr. Keller mowing my lawn, the pastor that sat with me after Henry died. Those acts are not headlines, but they stitch a community together. I could have left. It would have been easy to step outside, breathe the night, and let the quilt speak for me. But walking away would have turned a finished piece into an unfinished sentence. I stayed because my work deserved to be witnessed whole, not half seen through gossip. Then Danny changed the room. He walked to the center, climbed on a chair, and asked for silence. He spoke quietly, about small things: nights I stitched by lamplight, cookies left on his porch, a hand on his back when he fell. He told the crowd he had thought the quilt was borrowed. He said he was sorry for not seeing. His voice steadied the hall. My daughter listened, and the hard line of her jaw softened. Neighbors nodded. Martha dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The applause that followed was not theatrical. It felt like a town remembering to be kind. I stood there, small and steady, and let that sound fill a place I had feared empty. When Danny finished, the room rose in applause. The sound came up slow and true. I felt a loosening inside, like a knot giving way. It did not erase the months of absence. It did not erase the ache, but it placed a hand where the hurt had been. And for that, I was grateful. And then Danny did something that changed everything. He walked to the center with a folded paper in his hand. He climbed onto a small chair and asked for silence. His voice steady, a little carried across the hall. "Everyone," he began, "I want to say something about my grandmother. She sewed for me when I was little. She was there when I scraped my knees. She kept us warm." I watched my daughter watch him, and the stern line of her mouth softened as his words unfolded. Danny spoke of small moments of being tucked in, of cookies left on the porch, of a steady presence that did not flash but endured. He thanked the room for letting him speak and asked them to hold their applause for his grandmother, not because she needed validation but because she had earned the respect. It felt like a bridge being built, plank by plank. The crowd listened. Some faces had tears, some had smiles. A hush settled that felt like agreement. I felt my shoulders loosen as if a knot had finally given. I did not need every apology. I did not need to erase months of absence, but I needed to be seen and acknowledged. When Danny finished, the room rose in applause like a tide. He took the small stage like a man who had rehearsed his courage in the quiet. Danny held the microphone and looked at faces that had watched him grow up. "I don't have many words," he said plainly, "but my grandmother showed me how to hold on." The hall leaned in. He spoke of small things, mending a ripped sleeve, pies left on porches during hard weeks, the steady presence that never declared itself. He said learning to call back was a practice, and promised to try. He told a short story about a bicycle chain, and how I had stayed up late to fix it. The laugh that followed felt true. Then he asked the room to stand and give my name a deliberate applause, not pity, but respect for years of steady work. "Applaud my grandmother for the years she showed up without asking for anything," he asked. The sound rose and folded over me like a gentle blanket. I stood under that sound while my daughter wiped her cheeks. Neighbors came forward with quick stories of casseroles and mended hems. Martha laughed and cried together. People who had been acquaintances offered memories that steadied the room. The town had become witness, not judge. After the event, Danny helped fold the quilt and carry it to the car. He handled the corners with care and promised to come for Sunday dinners and do small steady things, bring soup, take out the trash, sit and talk. Those promises felt like returned stitches in a worn seam. In the weeks that followed, life shifted in practical ways. My daughter called more. Danny dropped by with coffee and jam. The library asked me to teach a quilting class for children, and I found the kids eager to learn. A local reporter wrote a short piece. The library printed extra flyers, and 3 neighbors brought fabric and sandwiches. The town's kindness felt like a small chorus of ordinary grace. A note came from the town hall thanking me for keeping a piece of history stitched into the present. A woman hugged me in the grocery aisle and said her daughter had called home after watching the show. People offered help with odd jobs and small repairs. These were not grand gestures but steady ripples that rebuilt corners of my everyday life. The small attentions, an unexpected phone call, a thermos of coffee, an offer to mend a hem were more meaningful than any trophy. I sat many nights at the kitchen window and traced the line of Henry's old chair. The house hummed, the kettle, the distant radio. My hands smelled of thread and tea. I felt tired in the satisfying way of honest work. There was dignity in being seen, but what happened after that applause? That's the part that still brings me to tears. I stood under the gym lights and felt them warm my face like an audience of small suns. The quilts hung along the wall in a long, patient line, each one a history stitched by hands that had kept their towns soft stories. Mine was there in the middle, edges finished, the center square, a map of the life I'd lived. When they announced Heritage of Heart, my name felt both thin and enormous in the air. People clapped first, politely. Then that clap turned into something truer. My daughter was at the back, wiping her eyes with a napkin. She looked smaller than she had in a picture. Danny stood near the entrance, hands shoved into pockets, jaw tense, until his face broke into a shy, steady smile. I felt the quilt under my palms as if it were an old friend, warm and humming. The judge spoke about seams and technique, but then she read a line about the story the quilt told. "This piece reads like a lifetime," she said. "It holds grief and joy in equal measure." I wanted to tell the judge that grief had been there like a stone, and joy had been the river that moved around it. But the room had already tilted. A woman leaned forward and mouthed, "Thank you." When they called my name, I walked up, one slow step at a time. My knees remembered how to move when I needed them to. I accepted the plaque with both hands, feeling its weight. It was not the medal I cared about. It was that someone had seen the pattern I had been living in. My daughter approached and put her hand on my shoulder, not the old hand that scolded, but a different hand, softer, uncertain, grateful. We hugged then, in the way 2 people do when they've been circling each other for years, and finally step into clear light. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't erasure. It was recognition. Her shoulder was warm. We swayed there for a breath that tasted like steam and lemon. The quilt glowed under the soft lights. You could see the tiny stitches near the center, the ones I had made when Henry taught me patience. A school teacher pointed out a hidden pocket, and the crowd leaned in. People murmured about the recipe tucked inside, about the faded blue that had once been a blanket. I watched faces tilt toward the story, and for the first time in a long while, the story felt shared instead of private. After the award, people came up one by one with stories of their own. A man said my work reminded him of his mother's hands. A young woman with paint under her nails asked if she could learn to quilt with me. Danny took photos of the label on the back. My daughter stood near the door, watching the way people hugged me as if it were permission to come closer. People kept pressing their hands to the fabric as if they could feel the years through cotton. A freckled boy asked if the pocket mattered, and I told him it held a recipe for ginger cookies. He nodded like a keeper of secrets. My daughter stood with her arms folded at first, then unfolded them. A neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, whispered, "You did good," and I felt that whisper through me like warmth. The hall felt quieter after that, like a room that had remembered how to breathe. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, it stitches it into something beautiful. I felt the truth of that in my chest, like a small light shifting the dark. The night smelled of coffee and folding chairs, of lemon polish and someone's perfume. Children whispered in the back row, and an old man clapped like a grandfather. When I looked up, I saw Henry's photo hanging right beside it. He was smiling in a way that made my heart learn to breathe again. The picture had been mounted by the library, I later learned, as a small nod to the man who always sat in the front row of town meetings. There he was, between the banners and the quilts, as if he'd come to see me keep my promise. The applause washed over me. I held the plaque and felt small and big at once. The quilt had done what I had hoped. It had turned my private language into something that could speak to others. I walked out into the cool night with my family near me, the town's lights like a soft net overhead. The air smelled of summer grass and the strange sweet of victory that tastes something like acceptance. People were smiling in a way that felt like a net being lowered to catch me, and I let myself rest in it a little while. Life found a softer rhythm after the show. The kettle still whispered, the screen door still creaked, but the edges of my days felt less raw. Danny began coming on Saturday mornings with coffee and a grin. He'd ask, "Grandma, how do you make the crust so flaky?" And we'd laugh, flour on our hands. We made small routines. He fixed the loose kitchen light. He brought an extra hand for yard work. My daughter called more. Sometimes she called with no reason, just to listen. Those calls felt like a bridge being rebuilt plank by plank. Neighbors offered practical kindness. Mrs. Alvarez left tamales. Mr. Keller mowed my lawn. Someone left peaches on the porch with a note for Evelyn. The quilt hung in my living room before the library took it. People came to see it. Danny photographed the label and sent it to relatives. The phone rang differently now, not with empty echoes, but with voices that wanted to connect. The sound that had once haunted me became music. I answered with a small spring in my step. I found myself saying, "Come by Sunday," and meaning it. There was practical work. A seam had worn thin. I took the quilt to the church basement, where we mended together. We traded recipes and gossip and laughter. I taught a girl to knot a thread, and she showed me a braid for hair. It felt good to exchange skills. Danny helped in steady, ordinary ways. He fixed the gutter and cleared leaves. He sat on the porch with me, sometimes speaking, sometimes quiet. Those hours were surprising and sweet. My daughter started texting photos just because. She would say, "How are you?" and then, "I love you." The words landed like small stones warmed in the sun. A woman who'd seen the quilt sent a note and a check to sponsor my quilting class at the community center. Her letter read, "Thank you for showing the work of ordinary lives." I folded the note and put it in the drawer with recipes. The gesture was small but heavy with meaning. The community center class filled quickly. Children came with fabric scraps and eager eyes. We taught them how to thread a needle and the quiet joy of a neat stitch. Parents lingered, bringing coffee and stories. The room smelled of hot glue and thread and laughter. That class became a weekly ripple. One mother brought her elderly father, and he found gentle company in the work. The letter allowed me to offer free spots to families who needed them. Daily life resumed in kind, practical ways. Danny made breakfast weekly. Neighbors kept an eye on my porch light. Mrs. Alvarez called when the weather turned. These small attentions stitched my days into a steadier cloth. Grief remained. I still reached for Henry's chair sometimes. The house remembered him even when I did not speak his name. But the ring of the phone now meant someone might pick up. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived that surprised me. The envelope was handwritten. Inside, a woman wrote that seeing my quilt had reminded her of promises her grandmother had kept. She enclosed funds to sponsor my class. Her note ended, "Your work matters." I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice, the paper warm in my hands. The surprise was not the money but the recognition. Someone had seen the value in ordinary work and returned it like a small blessing. It felt like a small, returned grace. Sometimes I sit by the window and think about what it means to be seen. Aging carries assumptions. People think it is a slow disappearance, a fading into the background. But age is also a collection of work and memory and stubborn love. I have learned that being visible is not the same as being loud. It is quieter and firmer. I tell people, don't wait for apologies to find peace. That advice sounds bold and maybe a little bitter, but it is honest. Waiting for someone to say sorry is a gamble. You may wait a long time. You may lose your chance to live fully while you wait. Instead, make something that speaks for you. Make a call, send a letter, make a quilt. There is dignity in continuing to do the small, honest work. Henry used to say, "The world respects steady hands more than grand speeches," and I believed him. Your value does not shrink just because others are distracted. Keep showing up, keep making pies, keep mending hems, keep telling your story. Forgiveness is real work. It does not pretend hurt wasn't felt. It acknowledges the cut and then chooses a repair. That's what I wanted the quilt to be, an honest repair. I forgave not because I forgot, but because I wanted the freedom to move forward without carrying resentment every day. People may pressure you to keep quiet, to preserve peace. In families, there is often a cost to keeping things tucked away. Peace at the cost of truth often becomes brittle. I saw that I chose to risk discomfort to make room for honesty. It did not make the nights easier right away, but it allowed conversations to start. If you are out there watching, maybe you are holding something in your chest, call unsent, a visit unmade. Perhaps you think your story is only yours. It isn't. The things we do, our small daily acts, ripple. They pull others back by a thread. Your voice might be the thread someone else is waiting for. I am not saying confrontation is the only path. Sometimes reaching out with a pie on the porch is the bravest thing you will do. Sometimes listening is the work. Sometimes the best courage is to be quietly excellent at something that outlasts a season. Make that thing. Dignity is practical. It shows up as answered phones, as people bringing soup, as someone helping change a light bulb. These are small rituals that say, "You matter." They are not dramatic. And for those who fear being replaced, remember this. Relationships change shape, but they do not vanish if tended. You cannot force someone to love you in the exact way they did when they were young, but you can invite them back into your life with patience and with expectation. Let small things grow. At the end of my days, I do not want to say I waited for permission to be seen. I want to say I made space to be part of the story I live. The quilt is a record. It tells what we were and what we can be. Don't let silence write your ending. Speak, stitch, cook, call, love in small measures, and maybe, just maybe, your voice is the thread someone else is waiting for. I read the comments like letters left on a neighbor's porch. They came in slow and steady at first. Reminds me of my grandma. One person wrote, "Crying at 2 a.m. Thank you," said another. Parents tagged their children. A young man wrote, "Called my mom after watching this." The ripple began. The community swelled in lines and hearts. Some shared memories, photos of quilts and pies and small, stubborn kindnesses. Someone sent a picture of their grandmother's old recipe card. Another person offered to bring fabric to my class. It felt like a conversation across time and geography, a kind of communal mending. I imagined faces as I read. A woman in Nebraska wrote about how she learned to hem curtains with her aunt. A college student said the story made her call her own grandmother. The comments threaded together into a quilt of their own squares of gratitude and memory, stitched in text. People began to reach out. Someone said they'd called their parent. A few viewers posted about visiting an elderly neighbor. One commenter said, "This made me cry, and then call my sister. Thank you for the push." That is the sort of ripple that does not make headlines. It changes kitchens and porches. Stories heal, even when we whisper them through screens. The internet can be loud, but sometimes it carries a gentle weight, the kind that warms a room. Then, while reading through 100 messages, one name appeared I hadn't seen in years. The name belonged to Janet, a friend from my sister's circle. Her note was short. "Evelyn, I saw your quilt. Would you teach at our fair next month?" Her handwriting was precise, the kind that remembers straight lines. I read it by the sink while the kettle hissed. Travel felt like a big thing, but the idea warmed me. I pictured a trunk of sewing tools and Henry's photo tucked inside for luck. I called my daughter. She said, "Go, Mom. We'll hold down the fort." Danny offered to help haul boxers. Dates were set. The town council gave a stipend. Janet promised a spot at the fair. The class filled quickly. Children arrived with fabric scraps and bright questions. We taught them to thread needles and tie knots. Parents lingered and swapped stories while cutting cloth. The room smelled of coffee and the hot glue gun. Teaching was a surprise. It reminded me why I stitched at all. Their eager hands made my heart quicken. A young boy told me he wanted to make a quilt for his grandmother. I told him, "Start with a square. It grows." Packing for the trip, I folded quilts with care and slipped a small note in the trunk for new hands. The road ahead felt like a ribbon. I thought the story had been closing. Instead, a new pattern was beginning. Thank you for sitting with me. If this story touched you, please leave a comment with your own family memory. Tell me about a quilt, a recipe, or a small kindness you won't forget. Subscribe to Grandma Coast Stories for more heart-told moments. Share this with someone who needs it. Next episode, The Day My Neighbor's Secret Changed My Life. A story about unexpected courage and the ways a single act can ripple through a community. Dedicated to the grandmothers who keep us stitched together. Thank you, viewers.